The street lights dripped yellow over the polished chrome of the hired car. Rain had turned the boulevard into a mirror. Neon from the corporate tower blinked like a warning. Security men clustered at the entrance of the executive building, their earpieces tight, their faces set. A crowd had gathered, drivers, late-night cleaners, a few curious residents. He was on the ground between them, uniform smeared with something dark and wet, a mop bucket overturned beside him. He held his phone like a talisman, fingers trembling. The only thing louder than the rain was the ragged edge of his voice. "They beat my mom," he said. "She's dying. They beat my mom," he repeated, as if repetition could turn disbelief into action. The men around him stepped forward to pull him up. One reached for his arm, ready to drag him away. She arrived in a black car, hair tucked into a practical bun, eyes the kind of rare blue that didn't belong to anyone so used to privilege. He didn't recognize the face at first. People in high cars blurred into one another. Then he saw the way she moved, fast, decisive, used to being obeyed. He stepped back as she stepped out. "Stop." The word cut through the crowd. Security froze, earpieces whispering orders that dissolved into uncertainty. She walked to him without hesitation. "What happened?" she asked. "They beat my mom," he said. "They beat her. She works in the building. She cleaned the CEO's office. She said something, and he coughed. His breath hitched. He wanted to throw up. "Where is she now?" she asked. "At the west side loading dock. The guard wouldn't let me see her." She looked at the security captain, a man in a suit whose tie was as tight as his jaw. "I want to see her," she said. "That's a private area," the captain replied. "Protocol." She smiled without humor. "Protocol shouldn't be more important than a life. Call an ambulance." The captain hesitated, then barked orders into his sleeve. Someone pulled out a radio, someone else dialed. The janitor's phone scanned the faces around him, landing on hers again. He inhaled as if about to say something huge, then exhaled small. "You shouldn't be here," he told her, voice softer now that the cameras were pointed at them and the crowd had narrowed. "You don't know what it's like." She looked at him, and the expression on her face broke a little. "I know enough," she said. "Tell me your name." "Marcus," he said. "Marcus Lee." "Marcus." She said the name like tasting it for the first time. It wasn't the first time she'd met a Marcus, but there was something in his hands, calloused, careful, that made her chest ache with recognition. The ambulance arrived like an apology, lights washing the wet pavement. Paramedics moved through the crowd, and a manager from the building tried to reroute them, a woman who smelled faintly of expensive perfume and disdain. Marcus led them through a side corridor, every step an argument with the guards. They found her slumped on a steel crate between stacks of courier boxes, her cotton uniform shredded, a smear of blood in her hair. The paramedic checked her quickly, hands competent and kind. "She's alive," the paramedic said, voice steady. "We need to take her to the hospital now." A sob escaped Marcus. He grabbed the paramedic's arm like a drowning man grabbing a rope. "Thank you," he said to nobody and everybody. "Thank you." They moved the woman onto a stretcher, eyes closed, mouth stained. Marcus touched her hand before they lifted it, as if to reassure her that the world had not forgotten her. The crowd watched. Someone filmed on a phone, others whispered. The next morning, the company released a statement that used the words "isolated incident" and "internal review" and respect for all employees. It was the kind of statement that smelled of lawyers and slowed responses. Inside the glass tower, the CEO paced. He was a man who measured time by profit margins and thought empathy a costly diversion. He had been told a cleaner had made a scene. He had been told his daughter was interfering. Outside, in the news vans and on social feeds, the footage of the paramedic's stretcher and Marcus's pleading hands had already gone viral. There was a name attached to the woman who had stopped the security men, Ava Mercer, daughter of the CEO. Comments trolled, applauded, speculated. The company's PR team moved like a trained pod, damage control, denial, an offer of support that looked like payola. Ava didn't watch the news. She sat in a small kitchen above a community center, the kettle hissing as she wrapped her hands around a chipped mug. She wasn't there to be seen. She had dyed her hair a little darker to hide the highlights, worn old sneakers, walked with a limp she practiced so she would not be recognized. When the news called her a privileged interloper, she let them. The truth was worse and better than headlines. She had been sneaking out of the mansion for months. The mansion had pillars and portraits and servants who took her messages and hid her absences. She had learned to wear anonymity like armor. At night, she walked neighborhoods her drivers would never take her through. She listened to people talk about bills and broken vans and sick moms who couldn't get through to the clinic because the clinic was overbooked and underfunded. She worked in soup kitchens, listened in shelters, helped pack lunches. It wasn't just voyeurism. It had become the way she learned the world. Now, faced with Marcus and his mom and the asthmatic beeping of the ambulance, the practice became real. They asked her on morning shows whether she had acted rashly. They asked her father whether his company tolerated violence. Reporters circled the building like vultures. The board convened. Investors watched the stock wobble like a small boat on a choppy sea. Ava asked for access to the security footage. "We're conducting an internal review," the captain said. "Those files are private." "I'm the CEO's daughter," she said. That line opened doors and slammed others closed. She signed releases she could sign, filed complaints she could file. The legal team smiled like wolves. But she already had more than courage. She had secrecy. The phone she clutched that night had been recording. She had learned to record, to collect, to gather the thin threads that could be woven into proof. The footage showed two guards in a corridor, a woman in a faded uniform pushing a cart. She confronted them about a package they had refused to log, a package with medication that hadn't been logged properly. The guards laughed. The next frames were messy: a shove, a fall, a boot. The camera cut off and then returned to show the woman collapsed. Her face hadn't been filmed in the fall, but the bruise blooming at her temple told the story. Ava took the files to a journalist she trusted, small, dogged, someone who didn't care about byline or influence, only truth. The journalist's hands trembled as he scrolled. He didn't blink when he saw the timestamp and the name of the building. "We publish," he said. "No," she said. "Not yet." She had something bigger in mind than a headline. A headline would make noise. She wanted action. She called a meeting, but not to the boardroom. She called it in the loading dock, where the fluorescent lights buzzed and the union reps gathered. She invited Marcus, other cleaners, a few nurses from the clinic they couldn't afford, the journalist, and the cameras that had camped outside all night. Her father was on a different floor, looking for words that sounded like authority. He would be told, later, of the spectacle below. She began to speak. "I know what it's like to be invisible," she said. "I know what it's like to have your face in the margins while other people's signatures shape your life. I know because I grew up in these rooms and I left them for others to clean. There was someone who used to bring me soup when I couldn't eat what they put on the silver platters. She was small, but she taught me how to fold hospital linens so the corners looked like wings. She never asked me for anything. She only asked for fairness." Marcus watched her like he was trying to measure if she might disappear. The journalists started recording and the cleaners leaned in. The cameras outside adjusted their lenses. On the internet, thousands tuned in to watch a rich girl talk to working people. "I'm not here to defend what happened," she said. "I'm here to fix it." She took a breath and handed over the footage. That changed everything. The footage was undeniable. The shove, the silence, the policy skirting that let guards act as if the building's laws were theirs alone. The public saw what the company had been trying to hide. People sent messages. Employees whispered in hallways. The board called an emergency meeting. The investors called lawyers. The CEO's face, seen on the morning shows, was tight, measured, like someone who had misread the room. He called his daughter into his office. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Saving us from becoming monsters," she said. "Saving you from becoming a story." "You're making a scene," he said. "The company cannot. The company has already become a story," she interrupted. "My silence would make me complicit." He didn't understand. He never had to understand the people who stocked his fridge or washed his suits. He had numbers. He had charts. He had a lawyer who told him to say, "We're deeply concerned," and full cooperation, and hire a PR firm. Her secret, when she finally revealed it, wasn't an act of rebellion for its own sake. She took a breath and said, "My mother wasn't the only one who taught me to fold corners so they looked like wings. Marcus's mom, her name is Eleanor Lee, was the woman who found me in a storage room when I was 5 and couldn't open the door. She wrapped me in a blanket and hummed a song and called out my name until someone came. I was supposed to be invisible. Instead, she made me a person." The room went quiet. Marcus's jaw loosened. Somewhere, a camera zoom clicked. "You're lying," her father said. "No," she said. A memory isn't a lie. You used charity to build a narrative, he snapped. She wasn't the only woman in the building. He couldn't hit her with his words in public without looking small, so he tried policy. The legal team drafted memos. The security captain demanded apologies. The guards threatened lawsuits. But Ava had recorded more than violence. She had records of overtime denied, of safety violations covered up, of a maintenance budget cut so deep that the only way a worker could get paid for overtime was to beg. She had spreadsheets. She had names. She had the number of the mailbox where anonymous complaints had been routed to be ignored. She met with lawyers who represented the cleaners. She arranged for Eleanor to be moved from the hospital to a private ward where she could be treated without being billed into ruin. She sat with Marcus in the waiting room that smelled of disinfectant and stale coffee, and he told her stories of his mother working 2 full-time jobs to keep a roof over the house. He told her about the time she pawned a locket to pay for his antibiotics. He told her about nights they slept in shifts so one could hold the blanket while the other slept. When the company tried to frame the incident as an isolated misunderstanding, the footage and the testimonies told a different truth. Employees came forward with small injustices that stitched themselves into a pattern of neglect. The union talked about systemic problems. Regulators opened inquiries. Social feeds, once fickle, clung to this story. Her father lost the board's confidence. Investors demanded accountability. The CEO announced, on a carefully scripted call, that he would step aside while an external review took place. The phrasing was staged so it would seem voluntary. He wanted dignity. The public, for once, didn't give it to him. Ava's secret, the one that shocked everyone more than the footage, was what she did next. Instead of calling the press to declare victory, she stood in front of the cameras and read a short statement. "My name is Ava Mercer. I am the CEO's daughter and a coward who once hid behind wealth. I will not be your heiress if being an heiress means turning away from people who make our lives possible. I will give up my executive privileges until the company changes its policies, until every worker has access to health care, until safety is not a budget line to be sacrificed for profit." The room burned around her. Investors rushed to reassure markets. Activists cheered. Some of her father's allies called her naive. Some called her traitor. Marcus looked like he didn't quite know how to feel. Relieved, protective, suspicious. Ava didn't make promises she couldn't keep. She signed legal agreements that put money into worker clinics, into paid sick days, into an anonymous reporting system with real protections. She fired the captain, the 2 guards were suspended, and the company brought in independent auditors. The woman in the hospital woke up to nurses who smiled, like people who had been given time to breathe. Her father watched as his empire reshaped itself by public pressure and private shame. He tried to accuse her of grandstanding, of trying to rebuild her image. She let him say it. The truth had teeth, and it wouldn't be softened by his anger. Weeks later, Eleanor was discharged. The scar on her temple remained, a map of what had nearly been lost. She went home to a small apartment that Marcus had cleaned out and filled with groceries and other small treasures. She was quiet and fierce, the way people are when they've been close to losing everything. The cameras followed the story for a while, then moved on, but the change stayed. Wages rose a little where pressure had been applied. A clinic got its funding. A policy manual became a living document monitored by people who had once been ignored. In the quiet moments, Ava would walk the alleys and past the community center. Marcus would sometimes be there, wiping down tables, joking with the kids. They moved between their worlds now with a new understanding. He still had the same hands, calloused, careful, and she kept a photograph of Eleanor propped on her desk in the community center, a small thing that reminded her who she'd been and who she wanted to be. People called what she did naive. Others called it brave. She didn't think much about names. She thought about the woman who had once tucked a blanket around her and hummed a song. She thought about the way a corner folded into a perfect wing. The world didn't change overnight, but it had shifted. At a shareholders' meeting months later, the CEO stood at the podium, older in a way that made his suit look like armor he could no longer afford. He spoke about transformation and accountability in words he hadn't believed before. The press called it redemption. People in the loading dock called it relief. Marcus's son started school on a scholarship paid by a fund Ava helped establish. Eleanor volunteered at the clinic when she could, small smiles like offerings. Ava kept working in the evenings at the community center, sleeves rolled, hands folding corners into wings for a future she insisted on making. One night, as rain began to fall and the tower lights blurred, Marcus and Ava stood under the same streetlight where the story had started. He looked down at his hands. "You changed a lot of things for us," he said. "No," she answered. "You changed me." He grinned, small and crooked. "We didn't get to pick where we were born," he said. "But sometimes we get to choose what we do with what we inherit." He pointed at the tower. She pointed at the center. They both laughed, surprised at how easy it felt. The secret, in the end, wasn't just that she was the CEO's daughter who could walk into power and command it. The secret was that she had chosen to use that power differently. That choice shocked everyone because they expected her to choose otherwise. And in the quiet after the storm, in the rooms that finally had new lights and better locks and the clinic with a working oxygen machine, people learned what it looked like when someone in power refused to close her eyes. The world, slightly kinder, felt brittle and beautiful at the same time. They folded the corners like wings and watched them lift. They walked on, the rain soft as a promise home.